Chapter 5. It is a truth not often recorded in the more serious accounts of society that the greatest disturbances are seldom produced by those who intend them most, but rather by those who, possessing the least capacity for caution, act always with the greatest sincerity. In this respect, Minsk was, perhaps, uniquely qualified. That he should, in the course of his movements about the house and its immediate grounds, encounter Mr. Asterion. Inconvenient was not in itself remarkable. That he should choose, upon so brief an acquaintance, to form and express a decided opinion of him was to those who knew him entirely expected. "You," said Minsk without preamble, "are very smooth." Astarion, who had been leaning with apparent indifference against the low stone wall which bordered the garden, turned his attention upon him with visible interest. "I do hope so," he said. "It would be most unfortunate to be otherwise." Minsk frowned. "Smooth is not always good. Sometimes smooth is tricksome." "How alarming." "It is," Minsk agreed. "Boo says so." "I should very much like to hear Boo's reasoning." "Boo does not waste words on those who would misuse them," Minsk said gravely. "But he sees much." "I do not doubt it." Minsk stepped closer. "You speak well," he continued, with the seriousness of one delivering a formal warning. "Too well. Words should be used like swords, directly and with purpose, not twisted." Astarion's smile did not diminish. If anything, it refined itself. "And here I had thought my conversation agreeable." "Agreeable is not the same as honest." "No," Astarion said lightly, "but it is often more welcome." Minsk considered this and did not appear persuaded. "You must not be tricksome with the truth with Vesta," he said. "She is clever, but even clever people may be fooled if someone is very smooth." Astarion inclined his head, as if receiving advice he had every intention of disregarding. "I shall endeavour to restrain myself." "You should?" There was a brief pause, in which Astarion regarded him with a curiosity that was, for once, not entirely feigned. "And Boo?" he said, as if the thought had only just occurred to him. "Is he always so vigilant?" "Always." "A formidable companion." "The most formidable," Minsk said with pride. "Where Boo goes, I go. Where Boo sees danger, I strike." "How reassuring." Minsk nodded, satisfied. "Yes, there is no danger Boo would not detect." Astarion's gaze shifted almost imperceptibly. "And he is with you now." There are questions which, by their simplicity, pass unchallenged, and this was one. "Of course," said Minsk. "Of course," Astarion echoed. He allowed a moment to pass, just long enough to suggest consideration, not long enough to invite suspicion. "One must be careful," he said then, with a tone so mild as to be nearly careless. "Even the most vigilant guardians may be temporarily separated." Minsk stiffened. "Boo is never separated." "I am relieved to hear it," Astarion replied at once, "though I thought, I may be mistaken, that I saw a small creature not unlike him earlier, unattended." "You saw Boo?" "I would not presume to identify him with certainty," said Astarion, "but the resemblance was striking." Minsk's attention sharpened at once. "Where?" Astarion gestured lightly, as though the matter were of no great importance. "Near the far end of the garden, though, as I said, I may have been mistaken." Minsk did not wait to hear more. "Boo!" he called, already moving with decisive urgency. "Boo! Hold fast! Minsk comes!" And with that, he was gone. Astarion watched him go. For a moment his expression altered, not into concern nor even into satisfaction, but into something quieter, more thoughtful. "Well?" he said softly to no one in particular. That was instructive. "There are many forms of knowledge, and not all of them are acquired through study. Some are gained through observation, others through experience, and a few, more dangerous than either, are discovered in the moment one realizes precisely where another's greatest vulnerability lies. That Mr. Ankunin should recognize such a moment when it presented itself was not, perhaps, surprising. That he should find it interesting was even less so. It is a natural consequence of uncertainty that the mind, being unwilling to remain in suspense, will often settle upon the explanation most readily supplied. And if that explanation is offered with sufficient ease, it is seldom examined with the care it might otherwise require. Miss Vesta, though not insensible to this tendency in others, was not at present inclined to suspect it in herself. She had not been long returned to the smaller sitting-room where Shadowheart had resumed her usual quiet occupation, before she found her attention once again engaged by a presence which, if not unexpected, was not unwelcome. "Am I to conclude," said Astarion, pausing at the doorway, "that I have been deprived of your company by more fortunate conversation?" "You may conclude," Vesta replied, "that I have been occupied." "How mysterious." "Not at all, only interrupted." "How unfortunate for those who did the interrupting." Vesta smiled. "You are very determined to be agreeable." "I am very determined," he said without crossing the threshold, "to be invited to remain." She regarded him a moment. Whether in amusement or consideration, it might have been difficult to say. "You may remain." How generous. He took this as permission enough, and only then stepped into the room. There was for a moment a silence not of discomfort, but of expectation, for though neither spoke, both were aware that something had been left unfinished. "You have seen him again," Astarion said at last. It was not a question. "I have." "And?" Vesta hesitated only briefly. "And I am no wiser than I was before." "How disappointing." "Not at all," she said lightly. "I am confirmed in my opinion." "How fortunate. You do not sound persuaded." "I would not presume to contradict you." "You have done so before." "Only where I thought it safe. And now?" "Now," he said, with a softness that invited confidence, "I think it unnecessary." Vesta regarded him with interest. "You believe me correct?" "I believe," said Astarion, "that you have observed him accurately." "And what is your observation?" "That he prefers to be admired at a distance," he replied, "and misunderstood up close." Vesta laughed. "That is very neatly put. I have had some practice." "And you do not think him merely reserved?" "I think," Astarion said, "that reserve, when genuine, does not require so much explanation." This, delivered without emphasis, had the effect of settling where a stronger assertion might have provoked resistance. "That is precisely it," Vesta said. "He speaks as though he wishes to be clear, and yet he is not." "No." "How inconvenient." "Extremely." Astarion's expression softened, though not in a way that diminished its intent. "It must be tiresome," he said, "to be addressed as though one were expected to admire what one does not understand." "It is," she said, more earnestly now. "I do not object to being disagreed with, but I do object to being dismissed without explanation." "And you feel he dismisses you?" "I feel," Vesta said with increasing animation, "that he has formed an opinion of me which he neither justifies nor revises." "How very efficient of him." "Efficient?" "In the sense that it requires no effort on his part," Astarion replied. "He has decided, and therefore need not consider further." "That is exactly it. There are few satisfactions more immediate than that of finding one's thoughts reflected back with apparent clarity." And Vesta, who had not been insensible to the difficulty of articulating her own, found the ease of this exchange particularly agreeable. "I cannot imagine," she continued, "why he should trouble himself to return if he has already determined what I am." "Perhaps," Astarion said lightly, "he has not determined it to his own satisfaction." "Then he might attempt to discover it." "One would think so, and yet he does not." "No." There was a brief pause. "He is your friend," Vesta said. "I have known him," Astarion replied. "That is not the same." "No," he agreed. "It is not. Then I shall not rely upon your defense of him." "I would not recommend it," Vesta smiled. At this point, Shadowheart, who had thus far remained silent, closed the book before her with deliberate care. "You are very certain," she said. Neither had been unaware of her attention, but that she should now choose to join the conversation altered its tone in a manner not entirely to Astarion's advantage. "I try to be," he replied pleasantly. "That is not what I meant." "I suspected as much." Shadowheart's gaze moved from him to Vesta. "You are satisfied," she said. "I am clarified. That is not the same. It is sufficient. For now." Vesta's expression altered slightly. "You disapprove?" "I observe. And your conclusion?" "That you prefer what is easy to understand." "And that is a fault?" "It may be," Shadowheart said, "if what is easy is not what is true." Astarion inclined his head. A most philosophical objection. "A practical one," she returned. "To what?" "To trusting those who require no effort to believe." Vesta laughed, though not without some impatience. "You make it sound as though I am in danger." "You may be." "From agreeable conversation?" "From convenient conclusions." There was a moment's silence. Vesta turned back to Astarion. "You see," she said, "I am warned against you." "How alarming. And yet, you do not appear concerned." "I am never concerned," he replied, "when I am accurately represented." Shadowheart did not look at him. "That is not what I said." "No," Astarion agreed. "It rarely is." Vesta shook her head. "You are both very determined," she said, "to be obscure in different ways." "And you," said Shadowheart quietly, "are very determined to be certain." "I am determined," Vesta replied, "to trust my own judgment." "And I," said Shadowheart, "hope you will forgive me if I do not trust it entirely." Vesta did not answer. There are few disagreements more difficult to resolve than those in which neither party believes themselves unreasonable, and as neither was inclined at present to concede the point, the conversation, though not concluded, could not be easily continued. Astarion, who had no desire to press where resistance might diminish his advantage, allowed the moment to pass. "I should not wish," he said lightly, "to be the cause of discord." "You are not," Vesta replied quickly. "Then I am reassured." And though the subject was for the moment set aside, it was not, for that reason, forgotten, for impressions, once confirmed, are not easily undone, and those which are most agreeable are often the least willingly examined. It is not always in the first heat of feeling that a resolution is formed, for though the mind may be quick to decide, it is not always as quick to act. There are, instead, quieter intervals, moments in which reflection, assisted by contradiction, begins to unsettle what had once appeared certain. Miss Vesta, though not yet persuaded to alter her opinion, was not entirely at ease in maintaining it. That Miss Carlack should speak well of Mr. Dekarios, that Mr. Ravengard should esteem him, and that even Shadowheart, though in opposition, should express doubt not of him, but of others, was sufficient to produce, if not conviction, at least a degree of curiosity she could not comfortably ignore. That she should, in addition, find herself thinking of him more often than she wished, was a circumstance she preferred not to examine too closely. It was therefore with a determination, not entirely free from impatience, that she resolved to seek him out. If he would not be understood, she would at least require him to attempt it. He was not difficult to find. Gale stood apart from the larger company, as though the presence of others was something to be tolerated rather than sought. A book in his hand, though not, it appeared, the object of his attention. He looked up as she approached. Miss Vesta. Mr. Decarios. There was, in this exchange, less stiffness than before, but whether this arose from familiarity or from intention, neither could have said. I hope, she began, with a steadiness that owed more to resolve than ease, that I do not interrupt. You do not, he said. I was not engaged. That is fortunate. I wished— She paused, as if reconsidering the form her request should take. I wished to speak with you. You have that liberty. I intend to make use of it. Gale inclined his head slightly, as though bracing himself. Vesta did not immediately continue. There are conversations which begin most effectively when neither party is entirely prepared for them, and though she had come with intention, she found, in the moment of speaking, that her thoughts were less orderly than she had supposed. At our last meeting, she said at length, I was not satisfied. I did not suppose you were. You might have attempted to remedy it. I attempted, he replied, not to worsen it. That is not the same. No, he said. It is not. Vesta regarded him with renewed frustration. You speak, she said, as though clarity was something to be avoided. I speak, Gale returned, as though it was something easily mistaken. And you believe me mistaken. I believe, he said carefully, that you have been given a version of events which does not entirely correspond to my own. You refer, she said, to Mr. Ancunin. I do. And you believe him inaccurate. I believe him selective. In what way? Gale hesitated, not from uncertainty, but from the evident calculation of how much ought to be said and how much might be misunderstood. He has, he said at last, a talent for presenting matters in a form most advantageous to himself. That is a fault not uncommon. No, Gale agreed, but it is one he has cultivated. And you speak from experience. I do. Vesta's expression sharpened. Then I should be glad to hear it. Gale exhaled, very slightly. I would not wish, he said, to influence your opinion unduly. I assure you, she replied, my opinion is already influenced. Then I should be cautious in adding to it. Or honest, she returned. Gale met her gaze. You may not find the distinction agreeable. That is not your concern. No, he said quietly. It is not. There was a pause. He is, Gale said at last, with a degree of reluctance he did not attempt to conceal. Not a man whose attachments are consistent. That is vague. It is intentional. I should prefer clarity. I suspected as much. And yet you refuse it. I refuse, he said, with more force than before, to present a matter which is not mine alone to explain as though it were a simple grievance. Vesta's composure shifted. You believe I would misunderstand? I believe, Gale said more quietly now, that it would be very easy for you to do so. And yet, you would rather I rely upon him. No, he said, I would rather you relied upon neither of us. That is impossible. Then it is unfortunate. Vesta drew herself up. You speak, she said, as though I were incapable of judgment. I speak, Gale replied, as though judgment requires sufficient information. And you refuse to provide it. I hesitate, he said, to provide it in a form that would do more harm than good. To whom? Gale did not answer at once. To you, he said at last. There are moments in which concern, however sincerely meant, is not received as such. And this was one. I thank you, Vesta said, with a degree of coolness not entirely unjustified, for your consideration. But I should prefer the truth. Gale closed his eyes briefly, as if the effort of deciding had at last exceeded that of delay. He is a vampire, he said. The words, though quietly spoken, had the effect of arresting all further thought. Vesta stared at him. He is… what? A vampire. That is not, she said after a moment, a detail one omits. I had supposed it sufficiently apparent. To whom? To anyone who has known him long enough to recognize the signs. I have known him long enough. Yes, Gale said with a dryness that did not entirely conceal his frustration. And yet, Vesta shook her head. That explains nothing. It explains more than you suppose. And what, she demanded, am I to understand from it? That he is therefore incapable of sincerity? I did not say that. That he is dangerous? I did not say that either. Then what did you say? Gale hesitated. That he is not, he said at last, a man to whom I would entrust the unguarded confidence of those I respect. And you respect me? I do. And therefore I am to distrust him. I would advise caution. Because he is a vampire. Because, Gale said, more firmly now, he has demonstrated in the past that he is willing to take advantage of those who do not expect it. Vesta's expression altered. You speak, she said, as though he has injured you. I speak, Gale replied, as one who has seen him injure others. In what way? Gale's jaw tightened. He has, he said with visible restraint, formed attachments under false pretenses and abandoned them when they ceased to be useful. That is a grave accusation. It is an accurate one. And you expect me to accept it? I expect you, Gale said, to consider it. Vesta was silent. There are few positions more uncomfortable than that of being presented with information which one does not wish to believe, yet cannot entirely dismiss. I do not think, she said at last, though without her former certainty, that I have been misled. No, Gale replied quietly. I do not suppose you do. And yet you persist. I persist, he said, because I would not have you placed at a disadvantage you do not perceive. And you believe I am at such a disadvantage. I believe, Gale said, that you are inclined to trust what is easily given. And that is a fault. It may be, he said, when what is given is not what it appears. Vesta turned away slightly. I do not like, she said, to be told that I am mistaken. I do not like, Gale returned, to see you misled. There was a pause. If either had expected the other to yield, they were disappointed. I thank you, Vesta said at last, with a composure that had not entirely recovered its former ease, for your explanation. You are welcome, but I am not yet persuaded. I did not expect you to be. Then we are agreed. In that, at least. And though the conversation had, in one sense, clarified much, it had in another left everything precisely where it had been, except that what had once been simple was now, unavoidably, complicated.